Hey everyone. We have Scott Jordan here today, and he comes from a very big background in recruitment on the staffing and internal recruitment, talent acquisition side, which if you don't know what that means, we'll put a little uh, dictionary, basically terminology in the comments. And anyway, I will let him introduce himself. He knows himself better than I know him. So go ahead if you want to do a quick intro and your background, and we'll jump into the topics today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Scott Jordan. I'm now the talent acquisition manager over at Urban Cable Construction. And my background is I started off at a staffing agency, worked there for a little over 3 years, started off as a recruiter, recruiting on everything besides IT, right? So I don't know anything about coding or anything like that, but any engineers, pharmaceutical, construction, things like that. I recruited for all those types of positions. And then I became a consultant or an account manager. And I partnered with pharmaceutical companies, construction companies, and engineering firms. One of the largest ones was actually Urban Cable. And so
Oh,
I ended up building a great relationship with this company and supported them all across the country, filling roles from, basic entry level laborers, which is basically, learning the ropes in construction, right? Whether that be aerial construction or underground, and as well as crew supervisors up through project managers. And then it was actually this time last year, they approached me about a potential opportunity to join them. And, how do we replicate what you're doing, but with us internally? And I thought it was an opportunity I couldn't say no to. So I was able to join them and then also bring on some fellow colleagues of mine. And now we have a whole talent acquisition team doing exactly what we're doing on the outside, but now internally for Urban. So it's been a very
nice.
exciting year.
That is super cool. Yeah, I love that. That's actually how I ended up leaving agency too. My
Yeah.
client was like, "You want a job?" That's really cool, and it's such a diverse background as well, especially the different industries and agency and internal. You build out a team, and so you have a lot of insight. And it sounds like your team has been really successful in replicating that because
Yeah.
I'm assuming your company wouldn't be like, "Go hire people" if you didn't have that process and playbook working where you're at.
Yeah.
Cool. So today's topic is to give the listeners a bit of a high level overview. We'll be jumping into resumes. I know a lot of you job seekers, there's a lot of different things online, a lot of clickbait stuff. Here, you're talking with two experienced recruiters. So we will give you all the insider information that we have to help you in your job search, building that resume, what we look for as recruiters, specifically us, and then generally some tips, even how your resume is working within the ATS system, which means applicant tracking system. If you're not familiar with that, it is a software that recruiters use to organize their resumes, candidates, pipeline, everything. Once you submit your resume, it is in this software for recruiters to see. Even some companies may have their hiring manager access to those. Then we'll go about what we look for, how we are screening you, what recruiters are looking for while they're screening you, general tips throughout, and then we'll close with agency versus internal talent acquisition. Which agency is your staffing agency's internal talent acquisition? Are those recruiters working directly for the company? If that makes sense, but I'll leave that as a high level there, and we'll jump into it. So kicking it off with resumes. So, is there a perfect resume? If there is, what does it look like? If not, how do you get the closest you can to a perfect resume? I know that's open ended, but what are your thoughts there?
No, I don't think there is a perfect resume, right? Is there any piece of paper that can perfectly say, this is who you are at work as a professional, as well as this is who I am culturally and how I'll fit in with your teams? No, there's never a way to do that. What I will say is that there is a as close to perfect as you can get way of building a resume per job. But that's the key. It's building it per job that you're applying to, right? When you're bringing up our internal systems, well, how do you get to the point where you can actually talk to a recruiter, talk to somebody internal at that company? That's all your resume does. Your resume basically just says, I'm good enough to talk to you, right? And so with the emergence of AI and different softwares that help read resumes, the key is to learn the terms that those systems are looking for. And they're very similar terms that our recruiters are looking at, right? Your resume is just saying, this is what I've done in my past, and this is what I can do for you in the future. And so, whether that is years of experience, longevity, depending on the role you're in, as well as just looking at the different terms. So, example, in my line of work with fiber optics, if you don't have fiber in your resume, it's pretty telling. That means maybe you're very well versed in construction, but you've never done fiber construction. That's key. That doesn't mean you're not a good fit, but you might not be a good fit for a higher level role.
Mhm.
So when you say a perfect resume, I think the perfect resume would be one that captures enough of those terms that relate directly to the job that you're applying for. That way, when a recruiter, or more importantly, the AI bot that's reading all these resumes can say, hey, these 8 people that applied are the best. How do you get your face out there so that a recruiter can actually call you? Would be my example of a perfect resume.
Okay, that's a great explanation. And so when someone's looking at the job description
Yeah.
and they want to apply, how will they find those keywords? Like, is there any tips you have on, which ones would stand out and which ones should they put in their resume in general?
Absolutely. So, first is just reading the job description itself, right? So, any role that you're applying to should have a paragraph description saying a successful blank does X, Y, and Z. What is X, Y, and Z, right? Is it, let's say it's billing. It'll say a successful billing specialist does high level management within Excel. That'd be a key term. Within and managing communication between cross functional teams. All right, communication, cross functional. So as you're reading it, you're picking up these key terms that are in there, and then to further that point, underneath there should be a bulleted list of key qualifications. Every single one of those bullet points probably has a key word in there that dictates why you'd be a good fit, right? Obviously, very, very basic. A key qualification for a recruiter is recruiting. So making sure that's in there. A key qualification for a recruiter would be, communication. It would be negotiation. It would be things like that. I couldn't think of another one there, right? But
Yeah.
ultimately, it's if you read the job description and the qualifications, make sure that you have a bulk of those terms within your resume, and don't make it harder on yourself. There's different AI writing programs that you can literally just copy and paste your resume into and say, hey, this is the job description. Can you merge these two? And it'll literally put those terms in there for you.
Oh, yeah. That makes life a lot easier for the job
Yes.
seeker with AI and our jobs.
Absolutely.
Um, Speaking of AI, are there any softwares that you can think of that are good for the resume and job description combination? I mean, I can think of Chat GPT, but are there any others, or is that the main one? What do you think?
So I'm a big free guy. So yeah, I love ChatGPT personally. Now I will say there's other softwares that you can buy that are specific for resumes. But I don't think that's really needed. In my mind, I think ChatGPT does enough. As long as you're able to proofread. Ultimately, all you're trying to do is get the key terms within the job description and your resume, put them together, and ChatGPT can do that perfectly for you.
Awesome. Okay. And speaking of the keywords, so is it in terms of the algorithm, is it the more keywords that match the job description puts you higher at the top, or say if only like 10% of the keywords are there, does it lower your chances? So is it like a quantity
Mhm.
thing, or is it maybe like if communication is one of the keyword, but they have communication, 15 times in the resume, which I hope they don't. But if they, like, do you know how the algorithm specifically works in that regard?
It depends on the internal system you're using, right?
Okay.
So there's some systems that will say this person is a 100% fit, and it'll kind of grade you that way, right? And so that way, it's a tool for to help the recruiters because typically we would start off with what the system is saying is 100% fit, and then working our way down. Now, I will say I'm thankful that the system that my company uses does not do that, but what it does do is like we can quickly sift through those, right? So it's not about if the keywords or the key terms for a role is negotiation, communication, and like multitasking. It's not about saying multitasking 18 times. It's, do you have that word in there at all? Right. Because it'll basically go through and highlight those so that a recruiter can go in there and say, oh, multitasking, they did this. Okay. Negotiation. Oh, they did it for, oh, it looks in two different roles, maybe. Right. And so basically it's it helps the recruiter read the resume quicker,
Mhm.
because unfortunately for the job seeker, most recruiters have a multitude of different roles they're looking at, right? From an agency standpoint, it's maybe two at a time, but for an internal recruiter, it could be up to 100 different jobs that they're recruiting for. So they only have 5 to 10 seconds realistically to look at a resume and say, is this a good fit? And so that's why you want to build out that resume per job.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I pulled a stat before we hopped on, and this says the average recruiter reviews a resume in 6 seconds,
Yeah.
which is true. That's what I did too. It's like,
Yeah.
especially when you've been recruiting for a while, it's just kind of like boom, boom, boom. I
Yeah.
don't know. It just becomes who you are almost in a way.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Well,
crazy.
and it can be very dehumanizing too, right? Which is why I can't speak to any other team, but I feel like my team does a very good job of like actually when we get on the phone, we are recruiting and reviewing you as a human being, not just like your resume. We're not just saying, oh, you've done this, okay, you pass all the little tickets, like moving on, right? So I think it's really key in any industry if you're recruiting is to recruit the human, right? Make it
Yeah,
people first, and actually get to the core of somebody, because you don't have to, the resume isn't doing the job the human being is, right? So it's important to get to know
exactly.
them and spend the 10 to 15 to 20 minutes on the phone with them to actually determine if someone's a good fit. Because it's not all about what you've done or the X's and O's in the past. It's about how you can fit in with the team, and the role that you can do.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said earlier, a resume is simply your foot in the door to get that conversation. It's not your
Absolutely.
app. Well, I guess it's kind of like an application, but
Mhm.
it's the purpose is to get on the phone with a recruiter.
Yeah.
What do you think about, because I didn't realize this until I was in the industry for a little bit longer, but I've heard people pay thousands of dollars for resume writing and stuff, which granted, I guess I'm talking about my age. I think this was before AI, so it may
Yeah.
be an irrelevant question. We're going to ask it anyway.
Yeah.
What do you think about someone paying someone to do their resume? Do you think it's even necessary now? Like, when would that be a case, or should they just probably not do that?
Yeah, not to date either of us. No, I remember that. But I will say, no, I don't. Today, in today's world, I do not think that's needed. Right? I think, um, with the phones and the computers in our pockets, there's enough tools out there that you can use to be able to make a resume. Whether that is, instead of paying thousands of dollars for someone to write your resume, maybe you look up and you find a tool that is AI generative, that can help create that resume for you. Also, I mean, depending on where you're at, right? So if you're going to a 4-year school or a 2-year school, go to those career center and services. I remember doing that in college, because I always worked blue collar jobs and Costco when I was working my way through school. And I never really needed a resume. I just went in there with a big smile and said, hey, I'll work hard. And they're like, all right, get to work. So I didn't really know how to make a resume until I was in the field. But to actually answer your question, in today's world, it is not necessary, at all for 90% of the jobs. Now, if you are applying for some C suite job or something that is a little bit more nuanced, I don't want to say no. I still think that if you are a person who's applying for that level of role, you probably know how to sell yourself pretty well. And you could probably use those tools too.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that too. And um, I'll add to that a little bit, because when I spoke to some of these candidates who said they paid for their resume
Yeah.
reviews and stuff, and looking at their resume, I'm like, man, you paid for this.
Yeah.
And I said, did that person who edited your resume, did they even hop on the phone with you to understand what you've done or anything? And they're like, no, I just sent them my resume and they edited it, which I thought was wild, because I'm like, well, in order to like really enhance a resume, the recruiter, whoever you're paying, needs to know about what you've done. And if they don't need to know, your resume is probably pretty good then. But anyway, yeah, I agree. It's so many resources and
Yeah, I mean, do
um,
they know about the awards that you may have won or key accomplishments, right? Past the key terms on a resume. If you were a salesperson at a certain role, it's not I negotiated this, I did this. It's like, what was a huge sale that you did? What were your average weekly sales? Like those are important things to put in there too that, AI doesn't care about. But the recruiter who's
yeah,
looking at it might see like, oh, you negotiated that underneath, like, oh, they were really successful in that role. Let me mark them to call, right? So if you're paying
exactly.
somebody and they don't know those things, then how good of a job are they really doing?
Exactly. And that's the number one thing that I see that is missing in a resume is those quantifiable achievements, which
Absolutely.
actually pulled a stat on that too before. And it says hiring managers, um, and I will say recruiters too, but I'll speak for myself, are 2.9 times more likely to consider a candidate that has those quantifiable achievements on their resume. That's the number one thing I tell people to change
Yeah.
is you need to, we can see what you do, but we can't see how well you do it.
Yeah.
So if you have like 10 resumes and you're doing all the same job, I'm more likely personally to call the one that shows that they did their job really, really well. Like that's what excites me to call as a recruiter. What would you say the same or anything different?
No, absolutely. I mean, those are people who, are proud of the work they did, and probably didn't show up to work just to get a paycheck, right? Like those are the key things to
Hmm.
kind of see. And, but I will say, as an applicant, be prepared to talk about it, right? And have
Yeah,
some
yeah.
enthusiasm and excitement when you talk about it. Like if you hit some key milestone at work, talk about how you got there, because that's also key for when you're doing the interview, right? Like you should have a good story to tell about the key accomplishments within your career, and also, if you have stories to tell during it's separate, but during your interview, you typically don't ramble because there's a natural beginning, middle, and end to those stories.
Yeah,
So that way, you allow the interviewer to, actually, go with a good flow during it. And it's the same thing with the conversation with the recruiter to get the most out of it.
exactly. Oh, that's such a good tip. That's such a good tip. I love that one. So outside the keywords, we went over the quantifiable achievements. Add that in your resume today. If you're listening to this, that's huge. But are there any other tips or things that a person can do to their resume right now outside of what we mainly discuss that will
Mhm.
help their resume stand out? If there's nothing else that you can think of, no worries. But is there anything that they should have? I mean, is it the
Yeah.
objective or summary at the top, a cover letter,
Mhm.
anything that you think would be important?
I think when you're writing a resume, outside of your contact information on top, which that's key. I don't know. It's how how many times I've seen a
Yes.
resume without a phone number or an email. So
Oh,
obviously, let's put a phone number and an email on top and your name, and address, so we can know we can see where you live. So if it's a complete 100% on site job that we know that you can successfully drive there every day, would be
mhm.
right below that. Whether that's then when you say summary, try to keep it to like 3 to 4 sentences, like short, but still gives a good background on who you are, and maybe even make the font size a little bit smaller because I think resumes should be as close to one page as possible.
Mhm.
Now, if you have years of experience, I understand maybe 2 pages, but if you can get it concise to one page is key. But underneath that summary, or in lieu of a summary, I would just put key skills. And this is your
Yeah,
opportunity to put in all those key terms, right? And when you say key skills, it would be the communication, it would be multitasking, cross-functional communication. That's your opportunity to put in all those filler words so that when you're actually talking about your experience below, you can keep it to your key accomplishments per role. I think that's huge because then the AI or the Boolean searches, and a Boolean search is it's a search function where you basically put in the keywords you're looking for, and so if you have those key skills, that's your opportunity to put those in there. So I think that's a huge tip for anybody is make sure you have like a key skills section so you can put in all of those keywords for Boolean searches.
yes, I second that, huge. I explain to candidates too the summary or objective, especially if it's going over, the 2 to 3 sentences,
Yeah.
it's just more room for error. I mean, I've had hiring managers not interview candidates that were good, and I just couldn't talk the hiring manager into doing it because there was a very tiny grammatical error because it's paragraph form.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if they can't even have this right on their resume, how, like, we don't want them. Like sometimes people are really cutthroat, and I'm like, oh, it's just such a room for error. Which,
Yeah.
granted, you have bullet points and sentences throughout your resume, but they're not kind
Yeah.
of written form. Or if the hire, it's such a preference area for hire managers and recruiters. So I love the bullet point skill sets. Cover letters. Do you think, is that a thing anymore?
Unless they're asked, no, I don't think so. I think cover letters are great for, so like my sister-in-law just got her PhD, right? So when she's applying to become a professor or to do this or her postdocs, yeah, cover letters necessary, right? Like the cover letters where she talks about her past projects and research and how it's going to be applicable and how she's going to better that university, right? So if you're in the
Mhm.
academic space, or heavy scientific sector, I think, right? I support a lot of pharmaceutical companies and they would like to see that. Um, but even then, I think outside of those sectors, I don't think it's really necessary because, to your point, it's just more room for error. And depending on the role, I honestly agree. If you're an accountant and you're making grammatical errors, it's like I understand your job's based around numbers, but you're all about attention to detail, right? So if you're applying
Exactly.
for a role with attention to detail and you have a grammatical error, that's a huge red flag.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Awesome. I pulled in another stat on this, which I don't know. I'm kind of a data nerd. But as Scott mentioned, using those job descriptions and putting those keywords into your resume is key. I actually pulled a stat that said you're 36% more likely to get a call
Yeah,
if you do that.
yeah,
Um, and with the AI tools, like I've heard of candidates just spending hours upon hours upon hours doing this. I would say too, just to add, and let me know if you disagree, but I'll ask candidates, well, what kind of jobs are you applying for? And they'll tailor their resume with the
mhm,
AI or whatever, but they're shooting like two levels up, and they're like, oh, I'm not getting any
yeah,
callbacks. And my resume matches the description. But of course they'll take some of that stuff out because the description's too high. But anyway, I'm like, well, recruiters do see that it is two jumps for you.
yes,
And they're going to skip on you. So I get the motivation and trying to move up, but you almost have to like sell yourself on why you're ready for that. And you're not very likely to go two levels up. So if you're just
yeah,
trying to get your foot in the door, be honest on your resume. Don't push it too heavy. Because if you do and you get the call, when
yeah,
you get to that interview, the hiring manager and or recruiter will be able to tell that you actually haven't worked to that level and you were really stretching. So people are like, oh, I can't get past the first interview. And the first thing I look at is how much are you stretching your experience?
yeah.
And anyway, I wanted to just add that.
No, I mean, I think that's huge, right? I think you have to be as honest and as transparent with what your abilities are. The worst thing that you could do is fake it in an interview, and then show up for your first month and woefully underdeliver. Something I always tell, even when I was consulting and then now every hiring manager within my company is skills can be taught, right? There's certain things that can't be taught. Someone just showing up every day on time, having a good attitude, trying to leave the bad aspects of life at home, right? Like, those are the types of things, like that's what you're looking for. That's why it's that person first mindset when you're screening.
Mhm.
But the skills can be taught, right? And if you're applying to a good company, they should have room for growth. They should be able to explain to you that you're going to start off in this role. And if you learn these skills, you can move your career in approximately X amount of time. And so if you're as transparent as possible with what you can do and what you can provide, then you're putting your best foot forward, right? The worst thing you could do is over over sell yourself on your capabilities, right? Specifically, I can even just talk about myself. When Irvin approached me about this role, I didn't know, right? I knew I was a great consultant. I knew I could handle everything from an agency background, but I was also very transparent. I said, you guys want to focus on the quality of candidates that I was able to provide from this side of the fence. Okay, that's the key metric, right? I was like, I know I can do that. Like, I know I have the ability to come through there. They also said, we want to help lower agency spend. I said, well, I came from that background. I know for a fact I can deliver there. And then the next one was they had it was a high unreviewed candidate. So I said, that's simply adding in more help. I can do that. So if you're asking me to accomplish those three goals, I know I have the ability to do that. But I don't know. I still have a little imposter syndrome from day to day, but I do think that I've exponentially gotten better in my role since day one.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think it comes back to those soft skills too. And that's probably a big piece of, not saying your hard skills weren't
Yeah.
there, but maybe a big piece of why they hired you. And you
Yeah.
came across genuine and transparent on your capabilities, what you can, what you know you can do, what you think you can do,
Yeah.
but how hard you're going to work at that, and your expertise that can be transferred to that role to be successful in it. Um,
Absolutely.
one more question on the resumes, and then we'll move
Mhm.
into the other sections. But I don't even know how I feel about this really, but on a resume, when especially when they're job hopping, 2 years here, 1 year, whatever, and things have happened, COVID, layoffs. How do you feel about, and should someone do this or should they not put the reason why that job ended, especially if it's something that's like questionable, like, well, that was a year and that was a year. Should they put mass layoff, move states? Like, should they put the reason why they moved in their resume or save that for the phone call?
Um, this is so case by case. I think I personally like it, right? I like it
Mhm.
across the board, right? Especially coming from an agency background, there's a lot of people who do contract work, right? That's the
Yeah.
easiest thing in the world to say. It's like, well, I had I worked here for 3 years, but then for the past 8 years, I've done a lot of contract work. And all you have to put there is, I worked for this company for 6 months to a year, and then just put in parentheses contract, because then that way a recruiter can go, oh, it's contract, contract, contract. Now, when you talk to a recruiter, they may ask you, why did you only do contract work? And you should be able to explain why you're only looking at contract work. Um,
Mhm.
but in terms of job hoppiness, I do think this term, it comes back to what type of role you're actually trying to apply for. So if it's more entry level, it probably doesn't matter as much. But ultimately, when you're let's go back. So I'm rambling to on your resume. I do think it's a good practice to put in why you were at a place so short, as long as the reason is a valid one and a good one, right? Is if it's not,
Yeah.
if you're just going to a place and you can only last 6 months, okay, that's, I don't put the reason there. But if
Yeah.
you're moving, like for me, I worked at Aldi for a year, and then I worked at Costco for almost two. And that was because I was going to school. So I lived in St. Joseph, Missouri, and then I moved closer to Kansas City, so I had to get a new job for there. So I think in that aspect, it's good to put that
Yeah.
explanation in there.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. Okay, great. I think that was a really good, really great tips and overview on resumes. Um, and we already kind of touched a little bit on ATS, how the applicant tracking system, again, the software that recruiters use. It's the Boolean searches, which are the keywords recruiters use. So we went over that. But one thing, and this is kind of related to the ATS, but if someone's on, well, everyone's kind of using LinkedIn now, but someone sees a job and they can see that there's over 100 applications to that job, do you think it's worth that person applying for? And again, I know there's variables, how bad you want to be in that company, da da da. But if it has over 100 applicants, how should a job seeker feel about that? Looking at that job?
If you are looking for a job, always apply, right? You're going to miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And you don't know, like, out of 100 applicants, 50 of them were probably not a good fit. And a recruiter can easily see that. If you know you're qualified to do a job, always apply. And I will say, it can be frustrating when you apply to a lot of jobs and you see that there's over 100 applicants, especially for a lot of these like really appealing like remote roles. Um, but if you know that you're qualified, always apply, right? And just know that there's hopefully, right? I can't speak for every company, but there's probably a great team of recruiters that are attempting to get through everybody as ethically as possible, right? And treating everybody with the same amount of respect to diligently go through it. But if you're qualified, always apply. You never know. I mean, still people play the lottery, and those opportunities, the chance of winning the lottery is way less than it is for you to get that job. So you might as well take your chance.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And I love the key thing there is if you're qualified,
Yes.
because as a recruiter myself, we could have 100 applicants, but 75, say it's 100% on-site position.
Yeah.
Well, 75% of them maybe don't even live in this country.
Yeah.
There's no relocation for the role, and we're hiring in North Carolina and they're in California.
Yep.
So immediately that's 75 people out. And now you're automatically top 25.
Exactly.
Um, so don't be discouraged by that. The back end can look very different than what you're thinking. It's not 100 applications that are a perfect fit. It's
Yeah.
just 100 resumes in that submitted to that job. And a lot of people will just click a whole list and be like, apply.
Exactly.
And so that's great. That's great advice. So your ATS, and this is kind of
Mhm.
going into screening a little
Yeah.
bit, recruiter screening candidates. But when you talk to a candidate, your team talks to a candidate, what notes are they putting in the system, if any? Like, do you guys keep track of how did that conversation go? Any type of scorecard? Like, what do you do when you hang up with a candidate, whether they were good, maybe a fit, great fit? What happens on the recruiter side from there? How are you logging that conversation if you are?
Yeah. No, we're absolutely logging that conversation. And I will say my recruiters are very good, right? So I don't tell them, what to do and how to do it. Each of them, so our company is broken up into 5 different divisions, right? And so we basically have a recruiter per, and each division likes different things. So it's important for the recruiter to culturally understand each division and what they're looking for in that applicant, right? So their notes are more geared towards that aspect. The thing that's the same across the board, though, is validating what's on the resume, right? So as they're screening the person, it's saying, okay, they said they worked at XYZ company and they did fiber optic engineering and design work within Esri for 10 years, right? And so they would speak to them on that, ask them some higher level questions, and they would write, asked XYZ questions related to this. It seems like they know what they're talking about, like check, right? Or it'll be simple, like, yeah, they were very nice and cordial on the phone. That's an important, it seems small, but yeah, like we take note of that because culturally at our company, we treat everybody with respect. Regardless of who's on the other side of the phone, right? And so those are good notes that we take. So yes, we are always logging it. We are taking diligent notes. And I will say those notes it's about a paragraph worth, right? It's broken up into bullet points. So roughly 4 to 8 bullet points, I would say, per person. And then we actually take a version of that and we send it to the hiring manager. So the hiring
Okay.
manager can see our notes with the resume. So that way, when the hiring manager sees a person's resume, they also see what the recruiter, said about their experience and their personality, and also validating pay rate and things like that. That way, the hiring manager doesn't have as much work on his or her plate. They can simply go, oh, the recruiter said this, that, and the other. Okay, great. I would love to talk to him. Let's set up an interview.
So, and then those notes on that candidate,
Okay.
is it there forever?
It is tracked
Like
within.
attached to their profile?
Right. Yes. So this is it's different per system, right? So I'll speak on the system I'm currently in. So the system I'm currently in, it is saved to that person's profile forever, right? Within the system. And so that's another thing to keep in mind too, is that if you are speaking to a recruiter, that they're probably putting notes in that'll stay there forever. And so basically anybody who's applied through us, I can search their name and see their resume. Oftentimes we'll send screening questions to them that they can answer virtually, like on their phone or laptop. And then the recruiter can actually put notes in there too that we can review. It's important because if we've seen someone that's applied 10 times, it's like, why haven't they got the job? And maybe the notes are like, they're simply just not qualified. It's like, okay, well, sometimes if I see that, I will actually reach out to that person and explain, like, hey, it's not that we're being rude. You're simply not qualified. Are you willing to take an entry level role? And if they
Okay.
are, then I'll oftentimes try and make that work.
Okay, great. I think that's important. I always tell people, I'm like, be nice to your recruiters
Yes.
because there's notes, and it's not that like just so the audience knows we can't and we don't. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure I'm speaking for you too. We kind of have the
Yeah.
same training background,
Yeah.
but it's never like we put in this person was really mean or anything like
No.
that. It's usually just we're rating communication, professionalism, But if you have a 0 out of 5 on professionalism, as a recruiter, if I come across that candidate and see that, and I'm gonna be like, "Mm,
Yeah.
maybe I'm just gonna pass on this." So I'll say, if you're having a bad day and you answer your phone, and
Yeah.
everyone has bad days, and as a recruiter, we know that too. So sometimes when I see that, I'll try it, and
Yeah.
maybe they just got caught on a bad day. But
Yeah.
maybe tell, like, reschedule the call if you're not in the mindset to have that conversation. Don't force yourself to have it. You can reschedule a call with the recruiter. It's better for you to be like in a better mindset. Like,
Mhm.
I had this, for just a story real quick. I've had a candidate, and I thought she was crying on the phone. It sounded like she was trying to hold back tears, and usually, like, I try, I mean, we don't I try not to pry anyone, but that I
Yeah.
felt like I needed to say something, and I was just like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, and then she just started breaking down, and she's like, my pet died today." I'm like, "We need to stop now. I'll call you
Yeah.
in a week. The role's not going anywhere. It just opened today." Whatever. This was on when I was internal, staffing a little
Yeah.
bit more quicker, but
Yeah.
anyway, so if you're not in the mindset, you, like, just reschedule that phone call. The sooner the better, though. You don't want to, I say a week, but try to schedule it sooner than later, because
Yeah.
that role may not be there. Just keep that in the back of your mind, but don't feel pressured. Like, those notes are going to be on your profile for a long time. You don't want to lash out on a recruiter,
Yeah.
because hiring managers respect, in general, recruiters and what they say. I would say especially internally, because you have relationships with those hiring managers. There's plenty of
Yes.
times where my hiring manager was like, if they were rude to you, then
Yes.
I'd skip.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't want to say, like, treat us so
Yeah.
nicely and we're the best, but anyway, just stuff to
No,
keep in
I
mind.
mean, you earlier you brought up soft skills. I mean, it's the same thing. Like, are you able to put what's going on at home so you can put your best foot forward at work, right? If you can't do that
Yes,
on an initial phone call with a recruiter, it's hard for me to think that you can do that at work too, right? Everybody has
exactly.
things going on. I mean, a funny story of mine too is I remember I was calling somebody who's it was an engineer for some firm, and I was talking to him on the phone. We were actually having a great conversation, but I could have sworn I was hearing like some person at Sonic, like asking about his order. And then I heard him like place an order. I was like, "Are you in the drive-through right now?" He goes, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, it's my only time for lunch." And then we ended up talking about corn dogs for 10 minutes. But
Oh,
um,
yeah.
you know what I mean? But I think it's also be aware of your surroundings, right? And let the recruiter know, like, hey, I'm on my lunch break. So please, like, this is the only 15 minutes of freedom I have for the day, or what have you. Just make sure you tell the recruiter that too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We're human, we get
Mhm.
it. And then, like you said, it shows how you can manage your time, manage a
Yes.
conversation. If you're a director or manager or anyone, if you're able to, like, "Hey, I have 15 minutes. Let's do," like, you're
Yes.
efficient and you're just trying to be efficient. We'll never take it personally. If we ever need more time with you, we'll be like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna need 30 minutes. Let's knock 15 minutes out here, and then let's schedule the next 15 minutes for another day."
Sure.
We get it. We're busy. We have jobs. We're human. But yeah, it's all about handling it right in those soft skills. So it's going over to that screening and
Yeah.
soft skills. So soft skills, by the way, for the listener, it's, I don't want to say, like, it's your communication, it's your eye contact and interview. It's all the, not the hard skills. So hard skills is your certifications, your experience that you can put
Mhm.
on paper. Your soft skills is kind of like who you are at the core, your work ethic, like how you view work life. Like, that is more your soft skills. I probably explained that pretty poorly. Probably should have gave that one to you. But anyway, what questions do you ask to figure out those soft skills from someone? Like, what questions are you asking, and what are you looking for in the answer?
Yeah. So um, when it relates to construction, like in my field, the biggest question that I ask everybody, whether it be on an interview or screening, is have you ever experienced a time where you noticed a safety concern, right? It could be minor, it could be huge. Um, how did you recognize it? What did you do to try and solve it? And then how did you report it, right? And the answer is, in my mind, fairly irrelevant as long as they attempted to do something. But it's, did they take a second to think about it? And then during that answer, they're probably like, well, was I a manager or was I not? Well, if you weren't, how did you approach it? Right? Did you try and solve it on your own? Did you explain to me the steps it took that you were taught in your training? Did you mention that? Were you communicative? And oftentimes, if there's a safety concern, that's an uncomfortable conversation, right? So were they confident enough to actually handle that conversation and handle it well? And then like the reporting, like, were you diligent enough to do it after, right? So on the surface, that question is only related to, OSHA and, do you know the steps of cleaning up a spill or what have you? But on a deeper level, it's okay, well, were you paying attention at work? Did you have an uncomfortable conversation with your supervisor? Or if you are the supervisor, going to someone who's a subordinate and telling them to make a corrective action? And then were you, being diligent thereafter, right? So I will say this is something that, I teach my recruiters too, is ask questions that, when they answer it, you can answer multiple boxes of your own.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes back to, actually screening somebody, because skills can always be taught. What can't be taught is how someone, acts. There's actually a hiring manager I met with that back down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, but he mentioned that when he got promoted into a higher level safety role, that he took 2 years to build his team out. And this is all internal people. And he said one of the things that he would do, he would just take someone to Walmart, even if he didn't need anything. And he would go, to the back of the store, make them grab like heavy water bottles and, like those big sacks of water bottles, and then take it back to the truck. And he just wanted to see how they acted in Walmart. How did they go through the checkout line? When they were done, did the person just assume that they were going to help, right? And immediately go, oh, let's just start loading stuff into the truck. Did they put the cart back? Um, you know, it seems
Ah,
really, really minor, but if you're somebody who's going to do all those little things, it means you care. You care about the world. You care about other people around you, and it's those little things that really speak to someone or speak to who they are as a person. And every company is looking for that, but it's really hard to find out on a screening question. So I try and develop questions that allow an individual to respond and give you, sneak peeks at how they think.
exactly. Yeah. And I always ask my hiring managers and I'm doing intakes, getting the details for the job and what they're looking for in a candidate. And I noticed a lot of them, especially in the past few years, start going immediately into soft skills. And
Yeah,
I start open ended because I used to be like, what are the hard skills? This, but now I just let them go because if I notice that they're talking way more on the soft skills,
yeah,
that kind of like the core of the person is more important.
yes,
And I've seen that almost shift in the past few years. Whereas my first few years in recruiting, it was very much hard skill, hard skill. Everyone kind of had the same core in a way. Like I hate saying that, but it was everyone kind of had like a decent work ethic.
yeah,
Generally speaking, very generally speaking, obviously. And then, I would say like post COVID, really, I don't know what happened, but it was almost really hard for companies to find like a good core now.
yeah,
It's almost like a employer employee like disconnect that's
yeah,
happened in the past few years. I don't know if you've seen that, but I have. Anyway, so they're really looking for the soft skills for a
yes.
person.
No,
And that's really, really important.
no, it really is. And, and I actually have a great example of this too. So, when I was still consulting for Irvin, within their engineering department, very early on, it seemed like, they wanted experienced people for all of it. And I said, hey, like, can you break down like what they actually do? And this is, please forgive me, those who may listen, but it's ultimately like connecting dots, right? Fiber works by light. So if the light can travel, it works, and for your internet. And so ultimately, when you're designing the network out on the software, it's like connecting the dots with different shapes, and the shapes represent something in the field, right? Anybody can do it with the right amount of training. Like, you don't need a college degree or anything like that. And so I brought up to them, like, hey, we can actually build a unique team, with, that's also cheaper, right? And just giving someone an opportunity to learn a skill set. And so, they did a lot of work, and I'm sorry, it's so hard for me not to bring up names, but developed a training program where basically someone could learn this skill within a month. And I remember when I was screening people for it, I'll never forget. I was talking with this single mom. She had two kids, and at the time, Gordman's was like closing down, like all around the country. And she was like, Scott, like, I think this is a wonderful opportunity. I just don't think I'm qualified. Like, I've never done anything like this. I've always been like a cashier or in retail. Like, there's no way I can do it. And I said, well, like, are you going to show up every day? Are you going to learn? Can you Are you willing to take a chance on yourself? I said, the worst case is that you hate it in 3 months and then I help you find something else. But if you
Mhm.
think you can do this, try it. Went through the training program. She had a great head on her shoulders, spoke extremely well, and was one of the most hardworking people I've ever met. And now she's one of their like senior permit drafters, just killing it, every single day. And so that's why it always goes back to like, we can teach someone to do a job. We can teach them the skills to be successful. What I can't teach you is the mindset and the motivation to get there, and the communication skills to be able to network within a company as well. Like those are the things we can't teach you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I think people forget that, they're like, oh, I can't get past the first or second interview. And
Yeah.
then I only throw soft skill questions at them to see how they're answering it. And I'm like, that's your problem. You're answering it this way.
Yes.
You're speaking negatively about your past employer. You're saying you left every job because you got an extra 3 grand.
Yeah.
No company is going to want to invest in you if you're going to leave for, a couple dollars on the hour or whatever, like it's, so that's just one example, but soft skills are just they're like, oh, I have all the skills for this. And I'm like, you're focusing on the hard skills. You have that, but the soft skills are just
Yes.
equally or more important.
Exactly.
Like I think they're more important. It sounds like you do too, depending on the role,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yes.
Um, but a lot of times, like you can be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't use that intelligence to
Yeah.
be productive or efficient or help anyone, then what's your knowledge for?
Exactly.
You're keeping it to yourself and you're not helping anyone, the company, yourself. You're not like there's no use for it.
Exactly.
And I think people forget that and they know they're smart. And then a lot of people will come in with a very like entitlement approach, like you need me, which I've seen some career coaches like teach that practice. I don't think it's a good one. I think there's a balance of confidence. But again, hiring managers like different things. Sometimes they're like, I really want the, arrogant person or
Yeah.
very like I would say 2% of hire managers are like that. But there are some like that. So there's a place for you out there. But it's going to be less likely. I feel like a lot of companies kind of seek almost the same soft skills.
Yeah.
Now, very similar, hard work ethic. Can you show up on time? Do I have to micromanage you? Can I trust that you can do
Yeah.
your job? Can I train you once and not answer the same question 10 times? Like, are you going to take this seriously, essentially?
Yeah.
Um, and, I've heard candidates say, well, I left that job because they didn't have adequate training. And it's like, well, what was the training?
Hmm.
Well, it was only 2 weeks and then you hear it and I'm like, that's great training. It's like,
Yes.
that's really great training.
Yeah.
And I've heard recruiters say they're like, oh, well, my manager put me on the phone screening candidates and within 5 days. I'm like, that's the best training, getting you on the phone. The
Yes.
longer you wait, the more call reluctancy and hesitancy you're going to develop. And it's
Exactly.
better for you to just try it than bundle up all this nervousness for
Yes.
3 weeks and then you realize you hate it or something,
Yes.
so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, trial by fire is I think more people should do it, right? I mean, even when I first started, it was so hard for me not want to step in for my recruiters and help them with the relationships that I had already built. But I was like, no, they need to build it for themselves, so that the hiring teams will go to them first, instead of always coming to me. And it was uncomfortable for some, but ultimately now it's proven fantastic because now, I mean, it hurts me now because like I don't feel like I get a whole lot of phone calls, but it's just that they've established their own relationships, which is key because now they can work within their own departments. And I'll never forget my very first cold call. I came in and I was 26 when I first started, so for that company, it was, I was a little bit older, but I mean, I could feel my heart pumping through my chest, and I was just like, oh no, I'm
Yeah.
gonna mess this up. I'm gonna mess this up. And then the person answered, and I was like, oh, it's just a conversation. And I just started talking with them, and next thing you know, I had a meeting set, and then I was nervous for the meeting. I'm like, oh
Yeah,
no,
yeah, yeah.
happening again. And then during the meeting, I was like, oh, this is normal. Like I'm just doing a job, and now I'm comfortable in almost any situation. But there's a lot of things in life that you can't get good at it unless you do it. So just do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I kind of used to have that mentality. I'm like, oh, they're making me do this so early and da da da. I'm not ready. It's like, well, like you said, it's like, well, you're not going to be ready and you're not going to feel comfortable until you just keep doing it. Some
Yeah.
people are like, oh, I can't, I'm so nervous to do public speaking. How do I
Mhm.
fix that? Public speaking.
Yeah. Exactly.
I literally role playing and just getting past those nerves. Okay, great. So speaking of the soft skills and stuff, so how for a job seeker, is there a way for them to figure out what soft skills a company is looking for? I mean, is it more about like the job? Like, does a project manager have certain soft skills? Does a recruiter have certain soft skills? And how do they figure out what those soft skills have? I mean, it's kind of more for recent graduates, maybe like trying to figure out what soft skills am I good for? How do I find a job that matches my soft skills? Is there a way to do that easily or?
There's no good way to do that easily. I think soft skills is simply a representation of who you are as a person, right? So just attempt to be genuine. I know that during interviews, you try to put your best foot forward as you should, but you shouldn't hide who you are. If you honestly have
Mhm.
shortcomings in certain areas, be honest about it, right? I think the main issue I've seen is people be almost too humble where they don't talk about their experience. They're like, well, anyone could have done that. It's like, no, 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 not anyone could have done that. Right.
Yeah.
But in terms of just soft skills, it's just, you have to be who you are. Right. You know, I don't know have a good way to answer that. It's just, yeah, I think for anybody that you're applying to a role, especially new grads or coming out of high school and trying to join the workforce, just talk about who you are as a person. When you're answering questions, if you don't have any experience, talk about, hey, I used to do X, Y, and Z, but I know I can learn this skill set. If you look at my, when I was in college, I had internships, talk to one of them. They can talk about my experience. They can talk about how I showed up every day on time. Um, I think that's the only way to really do. If you don't
Yeah.
jive well with the person, you don't jive well with them. You're not meant to have that job, right? So that's why you have to
Mhm.
be yourself and let your soft skills or your personality show, because unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we spend most of our lives at work. So we want to make sure it's enjoyable. So be yourself, be your genuine self during an interview so that you can hopefully mesh well with your hiring manager as you're working.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the points that you say, be yourself, be genuine.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of people lie about their soft skills and what they're truly open
Yeah.
to just to get the job. Then they get the job, and then both the manager who hired them and the candidate are both miserable because the hiring manager is like, well, you're not who you said you were, one. And then two, now you're miserable because you hate a task driven
Yeah.
work day, or you don't like getting up at 7 a.m., but you told the hiring manager you love starting early because like
Right.
the internet said that that's a good quality. Like, it's not all the time. Like, every company is so different. And if you're just genuine,
Yeah.
then you will end up in the right place.
Yeah.
I mean, even employees I've hired, I'm like, this
Yeah.
is it. This is how it is. It can be cutthroat. I can call you at 6 p.m. when the hiring manager's in California and we need to get that interview confirmed for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I've had people cry. They're like, I can't believe I'm getting a call at 6 p.m. I'm like, we talked about this for hours in the interview.
Yeah.
um, anyway, so just be honest about what you're open to, because the hiring manager or the recruiter is asking a question for a reason. We're
Exactly.
usually not asking questions for no reason. For like, there's a reason why we're asking it.
Yes.
And put those context clues together. If they're asking you if you're open to work outside of hours,
Yeah.
well, usually they're like, you will. I mean, that's kind of a bad example, but just know that every question is, and feel free
Yeah.
to ask a question back to it. If someone's like, hey, are you open to taking a call at 6 p.m.?
Mm.
Like, you can say yes, but how often is that?
Yeah.
Make sure you're getting the right job for you as much as the hiring manager is trying to get the right candidate for them, because it will just make everyone's life a lot easier.
Well, yeah, even within our industry, it's travel, right? So,
Mm,
and sometimes you don't know when you're going to travel. So, like we had the hurricanes down in Florida. Well, a whole bunch of people from our southern division packed up and left. You can't foresee a hurricane destroying a portion of the country. And so, we're very transparent on the front end, like, hey, you will be asked to travel. You will be asked to do these certain tasks, or you might get a call at 3 a.m. because a bad storm came by and ripped out phone lines. Well, people, it's water, power, and then now in today's world, it's internet. So we all have to go down there and fix that. So I think it's important too for companies to be as transparent as possible with your expectations of employees, so that when you are interviewing them, they can give you an honest answer.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and just as much responsibility, like you said, on the hiring manager
Yeah,
side. I've seen some people like hide some things, like, oh, well, we haven't found a candidate, no one's open to this, so we're going to make it look a little bit better than it is, and then hope they stay. And it's like, just be honest with it. Someone out there will like it. You just
exactly.
gotta find them. Great. Okay. And I think that's good on the screening. Anything else you wanted to add on screening? Any tips or anything you wanted to discuss more on in that area?
I think ultimately, whether you are talking to a recruiter or on your interview, the best example or the best tip I give everybody is have a story or an example from your working history to answer every question, right? If you give them a story, they have a natural beginning, middle, and end. And that way you're not rambling on about the same thing. And then you don't get the most out of that, right? If a recruiter has 5 questions for you, but you rambled for 20 minutes on the first one, they won't be able to finish it, right? So making sure that if you are seeking to get a new job, that you have a template or you've written out what you are wanting to say during an interview or a screening, so that you can get the most out of those, and always have an example from a previous employer of how you've accomplished what you said you did on your resume.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's a really, really great tip, especially the story. It's just
Yeah.
easier for candidates, and again, they don't get stuck in rambling.
Yes.
I think another reason why candidates ramble is they're trying to just fit in as
Yeah.
much as possible, but no, at least I can speak for myself and let me know if you agree, but as a recruiter, I'm going to ask you all the questions that I need an answer for, and I
Yes.
don't really need anything else.
Yes.
Um, if you're adding anything to the question, it still needs to be tied to the question
Exactly.
somehow. So don't cram everything in. Like, don't assume that all that information you're telling us is helpful. It
Mhm.
actually will damage you more than anything. We will ask you everything we want to know. And if you ramble on, we'll probably just end it there if it's to a certain degree, obviously. But anyway, that's what my experience has been.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I'll never forget. I was interviewing for where we used to work. And the recruiter gave me the list of questions that, the sales manager would ask. And I said, okay, great. And I took that and I studied and I said, okay, when she asked me the first question, I'm going to answer all of them. And I did. So she asked me the first question and it was, and literally she started off with, tell me about yourself. And I said, okay. And then I literally had every question I knew she could have asked me. And I talked about myself, how I got there. And then I went through all the questions. And then I said, okay. And then she was like, well, I don't have any
Crushed it.
else. Yeah. And she's like, well, I don't have anything else for you. And so we ended up just kind of talking back and forth. And I asked for feedback at the end of the call, and she goes, "Well, you tend to ramble." And I was like, "Hey, if you give me another chance, or if I get an opportunity to speak with you again, I promise I want." They gave me homework, and I studied, so I apologize for that. But I think she inevitably liked it because she's like, "Well, he did his homework, and I think I can hone in on that." And luckily enough for me, I got another opportunity. So
Yeah, nice. And you might not have if you didn't ask that question
right,
at the end and got that feedback and asked for another chance.
yeah,
Again, that showed the core and soft skills of
yes,
who you are,
exactly,
and the homework that you did. So that's
Mhm.
just a great example to tie what we discussed earlier in. That's hilarious, though.
Yes.
It's so funny. And I'll just put a disclaimer in here. If you're listening and you've done these things, we're not making fun of you. Like, we've been there, we've done it. I probably rambled a ton on this
Yes.
call, but anyway, everyone has had a bad interview
Yeah.
story or whatever it is. That's so funny. Okay, and then we'll end it. Oh, we're going a little bit over, but do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
This one will be quick, not too much to say in this area. I don't the job seekers, we'll start with like what you can get out of this first.
Mhm.
So there's staffing agencies, which is where I currently work at.
Mhm.
Scott has worked at one before as well, a very large one that we both worked at actually. And now he's an internal recruiter working directly for Urban Cable. So anyway, what is the differences and why are there agencies when there's an internal TA team? So what's the main differences and then why do agencies exist when there's a corporate team to do the recruiting?
Yeah. So I'll start off with why they exist. Not every company is large enough to warrant a talent acquisition team or recruiters. Some companies are smaller and they just have their hiring managers do all of it, or they have one person at a front desk or one HR point of contact who does all of it, right? And for those companies, whether they stay small or they start to grow, agencies give that individual or give companies the ability to find talent proactively, right? Most companies don't have the ability to proactively go out there and say, I need somebody with this specific skill set, and then be able to handle it. Irvin was very similar in that sense. They started off in 1980, right? And it was family owned, and then they slowly grew over time. Well, whenever I started first working with them in 2021, they were on the precipice of becoming huge, right? And so they had two recruiters, but these two recruiters had 175 open jobs
Oh my
per.
gosh.
Yes, and so they didn't have the bandwidth to get through everybody. And my approach was I built a relationship with the managers, and I got to know what they were looking for outside of experience, and then built that personal touch, right? So agencies have that ability to do that personal touch and be more hands-on because the recruiters have less recs. It's 1-2. And so they can really get to know somebody. I wouldn't say intimately, maybe that's not the right word, but they have more time to give to that individual, whereas internal TA we don't, because we're looking at the whole pie as opposed to one slice, right? Where an agency can really hone in on that one slice and get that individual. So the reason they exist is for higher end talent having more the ability to really just proactively find people, as well as helping out smaller companies who can't do it for themselves. And then TA exists obviously to help companies when they're at this certain level. Now, your other question was related to the job seeker and what they should look for. Okay. The job seeker, I mean, ultimately, just depends. Like, I don't think there's a wrong answer there, right? I think if you're comfortable in a contract space, or maybe it's a contract to hire, and that just means that you start off on a contract or you're a temp worker and then you become a full-time employee of a company. If you're comfortable doing that, go through an agency. Or if you're somebody who struggled to find a job, and you don't know why, go to an agency. Like, they will help you. Maybe it's your resume is not as good, or maybe you're just not applying for the right role, or maybe you're relocating to a new environment. Maybe your husband or wife or significant other got a new job somewhere else, and you don't know anybody, you have no one to lean on, no network. Go to an agency, because agencies have those connections everywhere.
Yeah.
If you are just applying, I mean, basically TA, you don't reach out to a TA person. You just apply and TA reaches out to you, right? So I think, ultimately it just depends on your circumstance. But if you're someone who's struggling to find a job and you don't know why, I think agencies are a great way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. And there's a lot of candidates that I've spoken to from the agency side, and I tell them I'm an agency and it's kind of confusing for them. I explain
Mhm.
it, but a lot of them are like, oh, well, you're going to take money from my hourly rate, or do I have to pay you, or any
Yeah.
of, those things. And
Yeah.
I think headhunters still exist in terms of like, you can pay us to go find you a job, but that's
Yeah.
more inbound leads. And, you wouldn't be getting a call from a staffing agency like, oh, do you want this job? And then you just get a bill.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, what do you think about, what can you tell the audience about that in terms of like, is this agency taking money from my pocket?
It just If it's a bad agency, they're taking money from your pocket, right? They never should, right? Basically, agencies across the board, if it's a good agency, should have they basically agree to terms with a company, and the company says, I'm going to pay this agency to find this resource, right? And there's no money coming out of the candidate's pocket. You are negotiating your pay with the company, and whatever that happens to be, the agency is getting money on top, but it doesn't come out of your pocket. You're negotiating your own pay. Agencies work with companies to find people like you, hopefully, right? And so nothing should come out of your pocket. Now, if it is, or if you're proactively going to a headhunter and saying, I need this role, that might be different, right? Then in that case, you are in turn the client, no longer the company's the client. So that would be a case where you're paying an agency because you're saying, I need help. And, you become the client at that point. And so you're paying the agency. But nine times out of 10, 99% of the time, an agency is being paid by a company to fulfill a role, and you are, in a bad way of saying it, like the product, right? So you're the individual that's going to that company, and the company's paying the agency for that service.
Yes, and usually in the form, especially when you talk about like a direct hire,
Yeah.
so nothing that's contract is, the company's paying the agency a
Yeah.
fee.
Yes.
Um, and it could be a flat fee, like just standard fee, or it can be percentage of your salary. But in my experience, like that's a completely separate budget. None of
Yes.
my hiring managers are like, well, if this is our budget because your fee is this and we're taking it out. So it's never the case. In my experience, where the hiring manager is taking the fee out of the candidate's salary.
Yeah.
If that were the case, then their internal team probably be able to fill it better, because then there's
Exactly.
X amount of dollars on top of the salary, and we just lowered it. So it usually wouldn't even work anyway like that, because the fees can be pretty high. I mean,
Yes.
agencies have increased their fees. I think when I was leaving the place you and I were at, they were upping it to 25 to 30%, not
Yeah.
for executive too.
Yes.
Um, or I left before you, sorry. And when I
Mhm.
was there, it was 18 to 20,
Yeah.
and Kbex were still on a lower fee. But anyway, so those are the differences. Good tips if you're looking for contract work and stuff like that. Agency is great to go to. So is there a certain point where you guys go to an agency? I know you said the quantity, like your TA team has a lot of recs they're working on, high
Yeah.
level positions. Um, so I guess you did answer that question, but which agencies are you going to? You're trying to find a niche one. You just pull your vendors list. Like, how are you deciding what agency to use for what?
Yeah. So whenever I first started, there was a list of like 28 different companies. And so I literally just went through every single contract and met with every single entity that it's ever partnered with Urban and just had conversations. Now, what I will say from our perspective, companies that I prefer to work with have a managed service component. And managed services is like subcontracting or the ability to complete a project, right? So instead of putting a butt in the seat, it is, oh, I'm going to give you this portion of work, and if you can complete it, those are the agencies that I prioritize, um, because they have an ability to do more. But in terms of simply finding talent, um, I mean, I kind of just ask, like, and it's a gut feeling I have. I don't know. I'm kind of cutthroat in the sense that I'll have agencies call me, and if they're not, if they're not wearing a collared shirt, if they don't look professional in the first meeting, I'm like, no. I understand we're all remote, but you can't even look professional for like this first portion where you're trying to sell me on your ability to work with me. Um,
Mhm.
but outside of that, though, I think it just depends on the role, right? So if it's something that I think my recruiter is going to spend too much time trying to fill, and it simply doesn't make sense for them to dedicate that much time to fulfill it, that role will then go to an agency. And then in terms of picking an agency, it's just relationships. Who do I trust to be able to come through? Who has a proven track record? And as a whole, as a partnership, if they have a managed service component, then those are the ones I prioritize. That list that started off at like 28 is now down to four. I'd rather have four really really good partners instead of a little black book full of 30, because then that way it's a little bit more intimate, and I can give them more sustainable work, so that there's more consistent money in their pockets to be able to give that partnership instead of saying, hey, I know I haven't talked to you in 2 years, but here's some help, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think an important note to that too is those four agencies really, especially if you give an agency consistent business, they're going to understand your business. Your business,
Exactly.
not that other business isn't prioritized, but it kind of like recruiters get excited when they
Yes.
see, Irving come in, because you don't give the rec to 20 agencies, which I've
Yeah.
actually seen that as a big trend lately. A lot of recs will say like how many agencies are working on this, or
Yeah.
we try to push for the exclusive on it.
Hmm.
And some people are like, oh, we have 15 agencies, the role's been open for 7 months and we refuse to change anything. And we decline business. Like we wouldn't work on that. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, man, that could be so rough for your brand, because
Yeah.
I mean, when you work on a role as a recruiter for and sorry, this section isn't really for job seekers. So if you're a job seeker, you can close out. But it hurts your brain because if it's a candidate and I've had them complain about this, you'll call them, oh, we have this opportunity. And they'll be like, is this XYZ company? We're like, oh yeah, it is. You're
Yeah.
the fifth person today that's called me. I'm never going to work for that company because I'm tired of getting like, obviously you guys are desperate, but your
Yeah.
company may not be desperate. They just gave the role to 10 agencies, and agencies, like
Exactly.
you said, have one or two roles, and we go on those one
Yeah.
or two roles. Because time is money. Agencies work for free until they make placement,
Exactly.
typically.
Yeah.
So yeah, is that why you use a less amount of agencies too? Like, is in branding, is that a part of it, or?
I mean, it's two part, right? So I was successful with Irvin because I was the vendor, right? I was the main point of contact, and I got to know Irvin on an intimate level, right? I knew culturally what they were looking for. I got to know the hiring managers, and I literally had notes saying, okay, well, so and so prefers this type of person. So and so prefers this type of person. Onboarding typically takes this long here or here. And so it basically became a one stop shop where I would get a phone call and it didn't even have to be a long conversation. I no longer needed a 30-minute rec intake. So and so
Mhm.
would call me and I would say, how many? Okay, great. I got you. Is your calendar up to date? Perfect. Okay, I'll get it set up. And then that way, they didn't have to go out to a bunch of different vendors, and I was able to really hone in on cultural fit, selling in the company, selling in career growth and opportunities. And if you're giving it to 10 different agencies, you most likely don't have the ability to do that, right? And so whenever I have four, I don't even give the rec to all four, right? Certain ones I know do better in engineering, certain ones do better in this sector or that sector. And then that way, like you said, people aren't getting blown up with a bunch of different phone calls. And also it's selfish for me. I don't want to have 18 people calling me every
Yeah.
single week looking for more work. Luckily, it's, I have 4 points of contact now, and they respect my time. They know I will reach out to them proactively, and maybe I talk to them once every other month. And they know that I'm very transparent with what I have available. And so it's just, I think it's much easier. I'd rather have quality companies and individuals I'm working with as opposed to a bunch and maybe I save $1,000, right? Like, is it really worth that much? When it's,
Yeah.
like I have more time to be able to do my work because I'm not getting blown up with phone calls.
Exactly, exactly. That's always my question too with hiring managers. I'm like, you know, first of all, why 10 agencies?
Yeah.
Um, and then if you think about all the time, like you said, that you've wasted, I mean, assuming these agencies did an intake with you, which I heard some agencies just get a job description and work on it.
Yeah.
We don't do that. I mean, yeah, you know that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always found that like really, really interesting. And like the VMS thing is getting really big, and which
Yeah.
I get for really massive companies, like you got to do something like that. But yeah, I just don't understand that. But anyway, that's good intel and refreshing to hear because
Yeah.
a part of me is like, man, is this what life is now? 10 agencies on every rec.
Yes.
We have a lot of exclusive business too, but just the
Yeah.
new meetings we have and new conversations, that
Yeah.
seems to be like the trend is,
Yeah.
yeah, whoever gets there first, 10 agencies. I'm like, man, you know that you'll have the same productivity with just two agencies.
Well, and most hiring managers or most people within TA probably never had a staffing background either. Um,
Yeah.
I never even knew it was an industry, right? So whenever I went to school, I ended up getting my master's and I was like applying everywhere, like, where's my 100K check? I just assumed someone was just waiting with, a suit and tie. And they're like, Scott, like, you're going to do this for us now. And I would stay there forever. And it just wasn't the case. And then I landed at an agency and I discovered this whole different industry. And going through that and understanding how I was able to provide a better product if I knew I had, trust, and they gave me the time of day, and I knew I wasn't competing with a bunch of different people. I was able to give them better people for their role, and really grow. And so now being on this side of the fence, right, obviously it directly impacts what I'm trying to do, right? I'm supposed to keep
Yeah.
agency spend low, but that doesn't mean it's going to go away forever, right? And so that's why I'm like, well, I look for people and I try and treat them the same way I wish I was treated when I was in that role, right? So I'm like, how can I be
Mhm.
the best partner to them? so that they're loyal to me and loyal to our company, and then want to give us and want to work with us, right? And I think that's a thing for life too. Like I treat everybody the way I wish I could be treated. Whenever I was going through the hiring process, when I was interviewing places, whenever I was trying to win sales deals, I want to be the partner I wish I always had. And
Yeah.
so that way, I feel like in turn, I believe in the karma gods that, I'm getting some good work back.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. And it's kind of funny because that we fill a lot of recruiter roles, and a big request is, oh, we don't want anyone with a staffing background. I'm like, man, I feel like to all your points you just mentioned, it's so good to have that,
Yeah.
especially if the company uses agencies, because
Mhm.
highly productive. They're like, oh, we have 100 roles
Yeah.
here, but I'm like, oh, the skill set is so transferable. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I'm like, okay, if you don't want it, then fine, because that will just that will
Yeah.
make then you won't need me probably, but not
Yeah.
saying that staffing's any better than people who just grow their career in recruiting and internal
Yes.
TA. You definitely are, but they're both can be really, really good
Yeah.
and just beneficial in different ways or all the same
Yeah.
ways. So anyway, that's such an interesting topic. But
Yeah.
anything else you want to add? I feel like that kind of wraps up a lot of good points and
Yeah. No,
discussions.
I think ultimately, finding a new job is hard. It's stressful. And, there's a bunch of different resources out online, whether you're listening to this or you are searching Google, but ultimately it's, don't be afraid to reach out to an agency and ask for help. Don't be afraid to, call a company's HR and just ask like, hey, what is the best way for me to get my foot in the door here? Always tailor your resume for the job that you're looking for. Always interview for the job that is at hand. Always have a story for your experience. But ultimately, we all understand that looking for a new job is stressful. In recruiting teams, whether it's from an agency or an internal, we are here to help. Right. So be as open and transparent with us so that you can hopefully land that dream job and never have to do it again.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. And know what you want. Know what
Yes.
you want going into interviews and companies, and ask the right questions for yourself too.
Mhm.
Um, so you don't get stuck hating every job you get into because you just did everything to get the job, and
Yeah.
which I know can be a place where people do get stuck because it's so hard for them, but really work on finding the right job for you. And you will just honestly be a lot happier. And if you're genuine in those interviews, the right match job will come for you.
Exactly.
And yeah, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Of course.